joint activity of the Business and Finance Group and the Interfaith Circle of the Deep Adaptation Forum. And my guess is many of you know about Deep Adaptation Forum, but for those who don't, that's mainly an online community that's set up to foster mutual support and collaboration in the process of anticipating, observing, and experiencing societal disruption and collapse. And there are roughly about 14,000 folks that have actually joined the forum. As Kat mentioned, she's actually one of a number of core members who actually conduct a lot of the strategy for the group. But for the most part, it's actually member driven. And we've broken, we have a number of groups, permanent groups that are set up. Viviana and I run the Business and Finance Group, and obviously that's set up to look at how economics, companies, and innovation are going to change as a result of going into collapse and proceeding through collapse. And Kat and Terry Rankin run the Interfaith Group, which looks at issues associated with collapse as it relates to those who are in faith communities. So that's who we are, and what we have done is we've invited a series of panelists who are going to introduce from their perspective topics about the role of faith as they view it and as they experience it in the business and economic sphere in light of pending collapse. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Viviana.
Yes, so I'll just say something very brief. Thank you, all our panelists. I think Kat will introduce them with a more detailed bio. But at the moment, we have Pat McCabe, Richard Murphy, and Ibrahim Khan, and we'll have a video potentially in-person / virtual participation from Yonasan, who may or may not join us, but we still have a video participation from him. So I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for being here. Kat?
Great, thanks Viviana. So yeah, I'm going to be acting as, nearly said referee then, moderator, if I may, and also honoring any questions that might come up in the chat. So if when you're listening, you have questions for our speakers, our panelists, depending on what they are, they might be something that we can ask them in their slot, or they might be something that we save to the Q&A at the end. But please feel free to put any questions that you have into the chat, and then we'll collect them up and put as many of them forward as we can at the end. So without any further ado, we'll start with our first panelist, and I'm delighted to introduce Pat McCabe, or Woman Stand Shining. Pat is a Native American elder whose work explores the meeting point between ceremony and deep social healing. Pat was born into the Diné, am I saying that right, Pat?
Diné, yep.
Diné, thank you, Navajo Nation, and has also received a spiritual training with the Lakota tradition. He travels and teaches widely on the indigenous science of thriving life. Her work seeks to rectify human knowledge, meaning making, by restoring the holistic knowledge practices known to indigenous peoples. To be the disembodied intellect and the observer, rather than passionate participant, harmonious co-creator, has led to a great misunderstanding of who we are, where we are, and how it is. And to talk to us a little bit about how it is, I'll pass over to Pat now. Pat, thank you.
Thank you. So I'll say, Yant e Bene, I'm greeting you from my mother's home here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the Southwest, what is now known as the United States. She's 97, and so we're good buddies right now. And so I'm kind of honored to be speaking to you from this place. And I'll introduce myself the way that we do among my people. I'll say, She'e iya, tachi inashli, aro ashi ibashishchi. So I'm telling you about our clans. my clans, and we get our clans from our mother, the ologists, anthropologists, archaeologists, etc., etc. They would call us matrilineal, but I don't think we have concepts in modern world paradigm or English to describe really who we are and how that works. But might be of interest to start out just by saying that wealth passes through the mother's line, and is held by the females in our culture. So right away we're in a different space. So I want to start out, as was said, I was adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life almost 30 years ago. So I'm going to start out by talking about this one. So this is a describing who we are, where we are, how it is, in a very succinct way. And so it's describing what lies in the cardinal directions, the 4 directions. It's describing the different phases of a human being's life, from youth to childbearing age, to the bulk of your contribution to life and elderhood. But it's also representing something, the sacred hoop of life, which is talking about how every living thing has been given a seat on this sacred hoop. And so as Thich Nhat Hanh has given us this fabulous word in English, it's hard to translate English into indigenous concepts sometimes, but he's given us this word interbeing. And so this is what this is describing, just how deeply connected we are. And so every member that sits on this hoop of life has to uphold its part of the hoop, or the hoop begins to fail. And so I believe that's what we're seeing right now. And so which member of the sacred hoop is not upholding its part? I'm going to have to say it's us. It's the 5-fingered ones. So in modern world paradigm science, which is radically different than indigenous science, because it starts with the premise, I believe, that from observation, it seems, that it's possible for us to know everything about everything. And so when you approach your science from that perspective, you get radically different results than if you approach your science knowing that it is not possible for you to know everything. And so in indigenous science, I'm going to say that as I observe, for us in modern world science, we see things tend to move in vectors, in linear progressions. And so we see this progression of evolution in which human beings are at the pinnacle. In indigenous science, we see it exactly the opposite. We see ourselves as being the last to arrive, and therefore the babies on the block. And we, as the youngest members of life, need to have instruction. We need to receive instruction from elders to understand how to be here. And so what I would say is that if we look around us at every other life form, plants, bumblebees, salamanders, elephants, clouds, mountains, stones, and yes, stones are alive. We can see that every other member of that sacred hoop of life, every single member lives their life in such a way that they only ever support all other life. They only ever cause all other life to thrive. Author Barry Lopez talks about the impeccable way in which they conduct their lives. Impeccable in what way? Impeccable in the fact that they don't disrupt life. They harmonize. They harmonize with the ability to thrive. And so I have to believe that we as human beings have that capacity. I don't believe we would be here if we did not have that capacity. But do we understand what that capacity is? Do we understand how to be that being also among all the other relatives that only ever, all of our actions, the way that we conduct our life only causes life to thrive? I believe that's what we're seeking. So I wanted to start out with that premise to orient us. So looking at economy, I think from Indigenous perspective, I can't represent all Indigenous peoples here, but I have spent a lot of time with Indigenous peoples all over the world in global ceremonies. And I represent two different lineages, I guess. And so I don't mean to speak for all Indigenous people, so this is the world according to Pat, but in a way, right? But also from teaching and lineage as well. But I see it as the only way that such a interconnected interbeing can operate is if every entity that is given a seat on this sacred hoop is given the space it needs in order to fulfill its perfect design for thriving life, which is another way of saying it has what it needs environmentally, in respect and reverence, I'll say also, to be able to uphold its part of this sacred hoop. And so Indigenous economies have had that awareness that we have to, we don't have to do anything. That's the other part of this construct, is every single being gets to choose what it wants to do. I mean, what a setup. What a setup. Everybody gets to do whatever the heck they want to do. I mean, look around us. Look what's going on. But look at what the life is choosing to do, apart from the five-fingered ones. It continues on with its pattern of living its life in such a way that it only causes life to thrive. But nevertheless, I'm going to say that every being gets to choose what it wants to do. And everything we do affects every other being. Everything we do affects every other being. And our ecological crisis is pointing this out in a way that we're finding quite horrifying. But it's a truth that has been known by some who have a different understanding of how to be human on this Mother Earth. And so our economies had to take that into account. And so we had different practices for harvesting fruits and grains, harvesting animals, harvesting what we needed to build homes with. Author Martin Prechtel, I had an opportunity to be in one of his courses, and he presented that in his time with the Mayans in Guatemala, that their principle was that they had to be able to replace everything they took for their lives within their lifetime. They had to be able to replace everything they took in order to live from the earth, from the community, within their lifetime. So, I'll hold this up. This one right here, I will never be able to replace in my lifetime everything it took for me to have this. Will I? Not a chance. Not a chance. And so people, his part of what he had to add was that modern world culture, people in observance of these Mayan people looked at them and said, how primitive, how poor they are. They were living under a very different economic principle in actuality. So I want to say that right now I'm involved in working with a group of people, primarily wealth holders, but others, wealth holders in the traditional economic money sense. And what we are agreeing about is that, one of our elders says in that group that money is the largest unconscious agreement, largest and perhaps deepest and longest running unconscious agreement that humanity has ever had. I mean, we made it up. And so perhaps part of our process needs to be to unwind and bring to consciousness, what are those agreements? I didn't want to know the principles of how modern finance was created. I didn't want that understanding to impose upon my reality of how things, how life, how visions, how worlds are created. And that story of modern finance, how it was created, I mean, it was created to be a rigged system right from the very beginning. We were never really meant to be able to work hard to have what we needed. Look it up. Study it. And I didn't want that influence to inhibit me in any way from the reality that I know of how things can be made, how life can move. But I agreed to come to understand it, and I'm glad I did. So this group that I'm a part of is a support system for undoing that belief, undoing that. I mean, because we get bombarded from every direction about what money means and what it means if you don't have it. I say modern world paradigm is the power over paradigm in which you must overcome another in order to have what you need. It is not conducive to collaboration or cooperation. So I'm going to say it is a human manufactured superimposed system upon the earth. And the earth's economy is exactly opposite. The earth's economy is radical abundance and fearless generosity. If you have one fruit tree, you understand what I'm talking about. Radical abundance and fearless generosity. So we think that we're going to bend Earth's will to humanity's will. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. So we're bumping up against that right now. So my time is just about up here, and I want to read one thing for us that came out of this group that I'm working with. So we spent 9 months together with our foundational principle for gathering as being we want to protect the sacred and reimagine money. And so we're working on reimagining money to open up a place to redistribute wealth as wealth holders are coming to understand the truth of what Chief Seattle had to say, which was, one day they are going to understand that they cannot eat money. Many parts of the world are already experiencing the truth and reality of that situation. So Paul, we're going to need you to mute. And I'm going to read this, what the prayer was made. These are people that have worked in finance for a long time. Goldman Sachs, philanthropy. These are some of the younger generations of the foundational wealth holders that was superimposed upon this continent of what we now call North America. And this is what we're working with at this moment. So I'm going to read this to you and then I'll stop. This redistribution of wealth container, we say we wove from the undoing of our unconscious agreements around money that we came to in the 9 months that we spent together. So we call it a basket. So I'm just going to use that word here. Upon the opening of this basket, together we make a place where thriving life, where future, where what is holy can meet, align, harmonize, and have access to our construct that we call money. where all that has been extracted from the Mother Earth, from the bodies of men, women, and children, from the body of the oceans, from the sky, from the bodies of the flying ones, the swimming ones, the creepy crawly ones, the four-legged ones, from the plants, from the standing nation, the trees, from the stones, from the soil, from the waters, from the internal organs of the Mother Earth, coal, gold, oil, from the five-fingered one's goodness, from our love, from our psyches and from our souls, from each place from which it has been extracted and gathered, from all the places where the flow of what is needed for cycling, spiraling life has been confined, directed, channeled into ways that do not serve thriving life, or love, or light, that do not serve future. All of this decimation of the beauty, harmony, balance, substance, and the sacred movement of life is now here recognized, reconciled, revered, and placed in the healing hands and volition of a deep and holy co-creation, is now released, flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, a dam released to the places most critical, to the places most generative, to the places most restorative, to the places most joyful, to the places most creative for the wholeness and integrity of interbeing, to the places most sacred, to the places most affirmative of our true and deepest consent to live unto 7 generations, to live with our relations on this sacred, thriving, powerful earth, to align with her boundless creativity, ingenuity, and unconditional love in the creation of endless, ever-evolving life. We give our love here. We give our place in fearless generosity here. We give our faith here. We give our place in radical abundance here. We give our consent here. With this opening, we break the bondage that was law over love. We open and prepare ourselves to love the future in ways that the scarcity paradigm would not allow. We give this basket power and ask it to give us future. With our participation in this gathering, with the sacred gift of our volition, from the place on the sacred hoop of life that we have been given to uphold, we open this field of the basket to receive the future of the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. May all that this flow encounters be touched and transformed in whatever way is right by this currency of consciousness that has reached out to us, and flow into and through the future consciousness that we are growing into. Holy life, holy future, please guide and direct us. Show us the ways. Thank you.
Pat, thank you so much. That was powerful. Thank you. And now we'll move on to our next panelist. Our next panelist is Richard Murphy, Professor Richard Murphy. He's a professor of accounting practice. He has also been a professor of practice in international political economy at City University of London. He's a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in England and Wales and has a practicing certificate. He was a senior partner of an accounting firm for more than a decade, and then became involved in tax justice campaigning, which is where I came into contact with him. I work for a campaigning charity called Church Action for Tax Justice, and Richard is one of the analysts and experts who we would listen to when looking at how to shape our strategies going forward. He co-founded the Tax Justice Network, Fair Tax Mark, and Finance for the Future. He founded Tax Research UK and co-created the Green New Deal, which is big noise in the UK at the moment. He's also founder director of the Corporate Accountability Network. He created the idea of country by country reporting, which is now being used in more than 90 countries around the world to identify tax abuses by multinationals, as a result of backing for it provided by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And he's the architect and author of the idea, the concept of sustainable cost accounting. He's also the author of a number of books and a frequent commenter in the media on tax and accounting issues. What always strikes me most, though, is how unusual he is for a tax expert, in that he speaks out for voiceless and sees tax as a tool for eradicating inequalities and injustice. And Richard, I'll pass over to you, if I may.
Well, thank you. I bring to this, in a sense, two faith traditions. The one I was first brought up in, which was as an Anglican member of the Church of England, and then the Quaker that I have been for quite a long time. As a Quaker, I now need 20 minutes to absorb Pat's ministry before I can possibly think about saying anything. So you're disrupting every sort of flow that I wish to currently partake in. But I will nonetheless follow. And I was thinking and reflecting on what Pat said and really why I arrive here. I'm trusting, in a sense, that this is ministry. And I was reflecting on how and why did I get from being Anglican to Quaker? How did that inform the work that I've done, in particular over the last 20 years, but for which the previous 20 years of career were foundational? And I had a massive question mark when I was a young man, by which I mean probably in my late teens. I'm now in my early-ish 60s, so we're talking 45 odd years ago. And that was what my parents' faith, when they clearly had faith, meant. Because if I'm honest, I couldn't much differentiate their behavior from that of many other people who I could observe of their generation, and therefore work out what faith meant in their life. And to me, it seemed as if faith was to mean anything, it had to have an impact upon life. And I spent some time in my 20s, early 30s, certainly wandering around, wondering what this issue was about, what faith meant, reading a lot of philosophy, reading about faith traditions. And I am still, in my opinion, very Christocentric. Some of those of you who are familiar with Quakers will know that Quakers are very open-minded about accepting different faith traditions can worship together. And I have absolutely no problem with that at all. But my faith tradition is that of Christianity. And I am also still an occasional participant in Anglican worship. I sometimes like a bit of liturgy, even though Quakers reject liturgy. I don't see a problem with ceremony on occasions to help us focus our ideas upon what faith might mean. But there's a text which I think is still really at the core of what I think Jesus of Nazareth, as he was then known, because of course he became Christ after he said these words. As Jesus of Nazareth said when he went to his hometown to begin his ministry. And I'm going to read that very short text to you. It's in Luke chapter 4. And he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has appointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release of the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Now, to me, that is an economic manifesto. I think it unsurprising that Jesus was an unpopular man in his time. My wife told me many years ago of a statement by George Bernard Shaw in his Manifesto for Revolutionaries, written over a century ago. The language is reflective of the period. George Bernard Shaw said, "A reasonable man will bend himself to the ways of the world. An unreasonable man will try to bend the ways of the world to his own way of thinking." Now, I think we don't need to use the word man in a sense now, of course we don't. But the point that he was making was that we have a choice. We have a choice to accept the world as it is, or we have a choice to change the world as we see it. And I realized that for me, when faith became of increasing significance to me, that I probably had to accept that challenge. And if I'm honest, the work I've done in the last 20 or so years, my work around tax justice, has been pretty much the working out of my faith in practice. Quakers don't have ministers. It's one of the things that is very clear about Quaker service. There's a Quaker joke which goes, somebody comes into a Quaker meeting, sits at the back in silence, as Quaker meetings usually are, and whispers to somebody, "When does the service begin?" And the Quaker who he's asked the question of replies, "When this meeting has ended. The service is in the other 167 hours of the week." And I felt that that text about freeing the poor, letting the oppressed go free, freeing the captives, declaring the year of the Lord's favor, which is one of the ways in which it is often written, is very important, because that actually referred to Jubilee, the freedom from debt, which is implicit in the idea of Jewish teaching in the Old Testament. And that here was a radical economic manifesto. And I explored that through Quakerism. I'm not a perfect Quaker. I'm not a perfect anything. None of us are, of course, perfect. We can only but try. And Quakers offered me a way into this which I was not getting, if I'm honest, from the Church of England. And it was built around 4 testimonies: peace, equality, simplicity, and truth. Sustainability has now been added in. You'll notice I spelled those out in a way that spells pest. I find it very easy to remember the testimonies by spelling pest. And now we add sustainability at the end. So Quakers are now pests, as far as the Quaker testimonies spell pests, which may not be the right way of thinking of it, but it certainly works for me. Sustainability having been added, but it can be implicitly there in simplicity, because one of the requirements is to live simply. Quakers were well known for wearing simple clothing. It was a way of identifying them. It was how they were identified as the troublemakers they were. The world often thinks of Quakers now as being very gentle, mild, peace-loving people. The Quakers got a UN Peace Prize, one of the very first, for their work after the Second World War. But in practice, the early Quakers were extremely troublesome people. Quakers in the UK are governed, if there is such a thing as governing, by a meeting called Meeting for Sufferings. Meeting for Sufferings refers to the fact that so many Quakers were in fact in prison in the 1660s and 1670s, that the Meeting for Sufferings recorded those who were suffering imprisonment. The challenge is really about reconciling these ideas. How do we reconcile this demand that we live in peace, we respect equality of each other, we live simply, we speak the truth, which is sometimes deeply uncomfortable, as I well know. I have certainly suffered discomfort for speaking the truth. And yet at the same time, we have to sustain ourselves and live in a world where there are those, of course, who do not share our opinion, where there is an economy, which may not be the one that we would choose it to be, but which is nonetheless there, and which we wish to shape as far as is possible to be consistent with our way of living. And for reasons that if I'm honest, I can't quite explain, but it became clear that my skills made it possible for me to complain about some of the profound corruption that I saw in the world 20 plus years ago, which I had witnessed in previous work when I was a campaigner with Oxfam. And which I'd seen as a chartered accountant in practice, the corruption caused by offshore, the tax havens of the world, the accumulation of wealth in secret, which opposed everything that, as far as I could see, was the opposite of equality, because it was designed to increase inequality. It was certainly, as far as possible, from simplicity, apart from the complex economic structures used. Obviously, the whole idea was to actually live a very complicated life, accumulating for personal gain, and was far from spirituality as it could get. deeply subversive in the sense that it set nation against nation over the command of resources, fundamentally undemocratic, by trying to undermine the rights of people to determine what they wish to do through their tax systems, through their governments. And so I felt that here was a challenge that I had to accept, that I had to stand up against something that I felt was really quite fundamentally wrong, that I could do something about. And much to my surprise, because let's be totally honest, when John Christensen, my co-founder of the Tax Justice, and I began working on tax justice, we were told we were stark-raving being mad. Well, plenty of people around faith communities have been told that before. We would never change. How on earth could you make something as unexciting as tax, as interesting as other three-letter words ending in X? And we tried to do just that. We tried to put literally tax on the front pages of newspapers, and we succeeded. We put Google, Amazon, and Starbucks, I was involved in creating all those stories, on the front pages of newspapers. We engaged with organizations where we had no apparent right to be. In 2015, I well remember sitting in front of one of those enormous audiences you sometimes normally see on the television, where there's sort of loads and loads of countries sitting around with their flags on their desks in what looks like a giant barn, this case in Paris underground. And I was told, well, it's you negotiating with 40 countries to achieve this idea of country by country reporting, to hold to account the world's largest companies for the use that they make of tax havens. And I actually said to the chap sitting next to me, who was really there just for moral support, because he said nothing during the whole meeting, it was basically me and 40 nations, who gave me the right to be here this morning to represent the rest of the world against this lot? And he said, this is not the moment for an existential crisis, Richard. This is the moment to talk to your conviction. And that is what really I have done. Without making a big noise about the faith dimension to this, because that's not what I choose to do, I have spoken to my conviction. I have used that conviction that a better world is possible to argue that we can have better financial systems, open, transparent, accountable systems, that we can understand tax in a different way and our obligations to each other as expressed through tax in a different way. We can understand our relationship with government in a different way. We can understand the concept of nationhood and how we should resolve the conflicts that that gives rise to, because it can in better ways than we have to date. That we can, and have spoken about those things on many occasions, I hope. And that now we can actually also demand that companies do something else. And that is that they be accountable in the way that Pat referred to. You know, how can we be accountable for those resources that we use? How can we literally live in a way that is sustainable? And that is now the focus of most of my work. And my work is, again, completely contradictory to most of what we hear people say. For example, in the UK, yesterday, the government announced that we are going to demand that companies account for the amount of carbon that they produce. And this is one of their big ideas. I'm not interested in the amount of carbon that companies produce. I'm interested in how they stop producing carbon. Don't tell me that you produce lots of it. I'm interested in, can you stop it? How much will it cost? Should we give you the money to do that? Or should you actually be something that I now talk about, be declared carbon insolvent? You are not capable of undertaking your activities in a way that is consistent with the needs of this planet, those who will live in it long after I have gone, for whom I feel an affinity, even though I will never know them, to whom I have a responsibility, and to whom you as a business have a responsibility. I feel that is completely and utterly what is now demanded of me by faith. It is where I feel that this accountability that I feel is at the core of what my interaction with God, as I understand God to be, the requirement that I live honestly within that relationship is extended out into this broader understanding of what it is that business must also do to those who it is responsible to, its stakeholders, its employees, its trading partners, its government, and civil society and tax authorities, those to whom it must be accountable, and to those to whom who are dependent upon it. And that is a big demand to make, and yet to me it seems like the most basic of necessary conditions for there to be a proper trading environment in which we might exchange with each other. And I think that process of exchange is also fundamental. I mean, I don't believe that, unlike a lot of economists, and I've studied a lot of economics, you know, those books are behind me for a reason, and there are many more. I don't believe that all economic exchange is about material goods, and I don't believe it's all about money. I believe, obviously, it's also about that which is of emotional value to us, our family relationships, our friend relationships, our intellectual relationships, and of course, our purpose. And I explored that once in a book, which I called The Courageous State, which has the most incomprehensible middle section, which most people think, what on earth were you talking about? What I explored in that was the concept that our belief in the material well-being that we pursue has crushed our ability to fulfill our emotional, intellectual, and spiritual capacity. Literally, we spend so much time pursuing the material well-being. And what makes us do that? Well, actually advertising, the drive to be consumers, and even more so, the drive to literally impound us with debt, to put around our necks the mortgage, the grip of death, which is what that means in English. Grip of death is what a mortgage is. To enchain us with debt, to make us slaves to a system to which we need not be bound. And that is finally, and perhaps this is my last one, that's led me to work on something else, which is a better understanding of money. Pat is obviously going in a direction on this. I think my direction is slightly different. But to actually understand what this stuff is, I don't know even know if I've got any of it, you know, this physical manifestation, which in the UK looks like that. By the way, it used to be really good because at this point I would actually show my relationship with it. I say that's merely a token, it's inconsequential, and I would tear it up. Unfortunately, they make them out of plastic these days, so I can't even tear them up anymore. But get the idea of what I'm trying to say is this is a mere token of something else, and that is a promise to pay. But a lot of that promise to pay is about indebtedness. How do we create money that is fair? And if anything, a lot of the work I've done is about how government can reclaim this right, this understanding, this power to create money for social purpose. I think we need money. I personally believe that it's a necessary. It makes it easier for us to exchange, and I think that's something for the good. Obviously, it can be abused. We need, therefore, to impose constraints. But we also need to understand that the power to create money belongs to everyone, but that most of us create money which is of worthless to other people, but the government can create money which is of worth to everyone. And therefore it has a particular duty to do this in a way that empowers our well-being to the best ability that it can. It doesn't do that at present. It outsources it directly to the financial markets, which I believe is wrong. It should be doing it very clearly, as far as I can see, for the benefit of society at large. And this is my sort of, I suppose, of all those issues I'm dealing with, the one that perhaps underpins it, this belief that we must be free to be the best that we are, to fulfill our emotional, intellectual, and spiritual needs as much as our material. And that if we really, truly understood the power of money, we would be able to do that better than we can at present. And for as long as I hope I breathe, I will be working on trying to communicate these issues, because to me, they are what I was put here to do. And they are the mission that I was given, much more than I would ever have been given the mission to stand in front of a congregation, preach a sermon or whatever else. My job informed by my faith, is to talk about how we can bend our economies to fulfill our best potential as people.
Richard, thank you. Thank you so much for that. A lot to think about there. Now, before I lead into our next speaker, Yoni, who I think will be joining us by video recording as opposed to in person. We have taken a question which, since Malika has to leave us soon, I'm going to quickly put, if it's possible to quickly put, both Pat and then Richard, if I may, and just let me make sure that I quote it. I hope you're still there, Malika. She asks, in fact, Malika, are you able to unmute yourself at the moment? I'm wondering if you want to put the question directly.
Thanks, Kat. Maybe it's better questions at the end after the speakers. I just wanted to put my question because I will listen to the recording later. But
you will, okay.
Yeah, I won't be able to be there after 6 o'clock. Oh, here this time. Yes.
That's fine. We'll put it at the end then. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move on to Yoni now, and I will just move on to Yoni's CV. So Yoni Yonasanarea holds a doctorate of ministry in semiotics, leadership, and future change, with a defended dissertation on Jewish-Christian relations from Portland Seminary, the Masters of Divinity, as well as a Bachelor's of Science in Religion, with a triple minor in Biblical Studies, Christian Counseling, and Psychology from Liberty University. When it comes to Yiddishkeit, his style is frum, his tradition is Ashkenaz, and his practice is Orthodox, from a Yeshivich Hasidic blended approach. He left Christianity to convert to Orthodox Judaism around January or February of 2017 as the result of his studies. Since then, he's lived as an observant Orthodox Jew within an Orthodox community. His dissertation focused on building bridges primarily through Jewish-Christian relations, both theologically and practically. He's a rabbinic field representative for Oregon Kosher, Portland Eruv, and Rachel's Well, and he learns Torah morning and night. He's been married for over a decade and has 2 boys, ages 13 and 10. And I think that either Jim or Viviana is kindly going, there we go.
I will play it, and you will also see Terry Rankin, who is another member of the Interfaith Circle, who interviewed Yonasan previously on issues related to what we're talking today. So I'll just play the video right now.
Greetings, everyone. This is Terry Rankin, Deep Adaptation Guide and administrator of the Philosophy Discussion Group and the Professions Network Group, et cetera, et cetera. And it is my honor to introduce you to my friend, Jonathan Esterman, used to be and is now about to, well, is actually Rabbi Yoni Aryeh. And
Reb Yoni now, I'm working on getting my rabbinic certification, so it's a progress.
Okay.
I do function as a rabbi in many areas, but I'm still working on the actual degree part of it.
I see. All right. Where would you place yourself, Yoni? And where does your local community of observant Orthodox Jews, and more generally within the broader Jewish communities of different types, without going too far into the distinctions between those types, where do you place yourself locally? And what's the general perspective or range of perspectives within the wider Jewish community?
There's this beautiful song out there. It's sung by this amazing group, very, very observant, right? They're called Counting Crows. It's the end of the world as we know it, right? Okay. A very religious concepts. Looking from an Orthodox lens, it is the end of the world, because it's year 5,782 of creation, and we are given the task to warrant bringing about the redemption of the Garden of Eden before year 6,000. And if we earn it, then we get, there's 2 options for Messiah to come, Mashiach to come, which is found in our Talmud. It's not found in the Torah itself. Torah is absolutely void whatsoever of any references to a Messiah concept within Genesis through, I believe, the Christian order of things ends with Malachi. It's just not there. There's allusions, but there's nothing flat out that says it, right? And so the Talmud discusses it, and they go into it, and they say, well, there's going to be Mashiach, and there's two ways Mashiach can come. Mashiach can come in a peaceful way, which is we have ascended to this state of purity as a Jewish nation and as a world into which we have earned back Garden of Eden. Now, let's forget the fact that we had the flood, right? And everything else that's happened since then, including the destruction of the temple. It sounds nice. But when you include all of history, and you say, if somebody does something and then they do it again, according to there's a halakha concept that they've made it like a habit for them, right? Halakha being a term for it's Jewish law. Humanity has made a habit of not living up to the standards of which were presented, which aren't that hard of standards. But humanity routinely fails at this. So it's unlikely that we're going to warrant a peaceful era with a Messiah in which everything's hunky-dory wonderful. We have till year 6,000, right? We haven't done it in 5,782 years. It's unlikely.
That's just over 2 centuries on your own calendar, right? Remains.
Yeah, it's 228 more years. Or 218 more years, sorry, 218 more years. 218 more years to do what we haven't done in 5,782 years. I'm not gonna bet on that, right? So let's look,
either.
so the concepts of the Messiah piece, that's out the window. So what's the alternative? A Messiah of war. And what is this Messiah of war? One that is ridding the impurity from us, is yanking it out forcibly, and bringing the world through a period of destruction in order to renew it. Because we have polluted the earth to such a means where we can't redeem it, Hashem is going to rebuild the monarchy, which our Messiah is not one that is of spiritual nature, but one that is of blood and flesh, under the lineage of King David. And it will lead this process of renewal, not through peace, but through destruction and rebuilding. In which case, the world is coming to an end.
Does your observant community share that perspective, I assume?
I am the Haredi in my community. There's several of us, right? But I'm more Orthodox than a lot of people in the community. I'm in Portland, Oregon, right? It's a Portland community. If this community was anywhere else, we'd have titles within the religious circles. Here we just call it Portland because, well, that explains itself. But within Orthodoxy, there's lots of subgroups and everything. I stick to the more observant crowd and more, this is how I do things. After all, how I dress, I live my life is all based off Torah. It's not, I don't do color. I don't go around and shop in the malls. I don't watch shows. I don't go to things, right? Not in the same way that everybody else goes to things. So I'm part of the more Orthodox crowd. I think most Orthodox Jews who look at it from a Torah lens would say, yeah, this is how it is. And so as a result, not all of them are focused on sustainability and environmentalism, because what's the point if it's all going to be destroyed anyways?
In just 2 centuries, yeah.
Yeah, this is where I differ a little bit. And I'm like, I get what you're saying, but we have the concept, if not who, then, if not me, then who, and if not now, then when. And that just because I'm not obligated to finish the work, says Pirkei Avos, it doesn't mean I'm not obligated to do what I can when I can.
Right. What does an economy look like under the law and the prophets? And whatever it is, what kinds of medium or media of exchange would be in keeping with the virtues, the values, the principles, practices, etc., of observance under that law and those prophets? How much human economy served God and human under those teachings?
So,
economy.
Let's dive into this.
What's an economy look like?
Purely economy, business ethics, these types of things. We have an entire category of Jewish law for this called Kosher Mishpat, right? Business ethics, more or less.
Kosher
and
Mishpat?
We have this.
That was Kosher
Mishpat.
Okay.
Kosher Mishpat.
Kosher.
Business ethics, right? We study this. How do we have to behave as a Jew owning a business or shopping from a business? How do we behave with other Jews? How do we behave with non-Jews? What do we do in all these different types of situations? When is interest permitted? When is interest prohibited? What type of sustainability initiatives do we need to do? Am I allowed to learn Torah on a lunch break? Am I allowed to learn Torah if I'm working in a bookstore and there's no customers coming in? Or is that stealing time from my employer? We have a lot that goes into the technicalities of this. We have entire studies and entire ways of learning dedicated to refining our knowledge of this, right? And so there's a lot that Judaism has to say on this, just as a result of that, okay?
Yeah.
There's a difference. I think there's a difference in your question here.
Okay.
Are you asking for here and now? Or are you asking for end of the world items? Okay, so first off, the world that we are going to be having under a messianic era is different than the world today, right? We're in what's called the B'diavad situation. It's not the ideal situation. We're in exile. We're in a world that does not follow Torah, it does not believe in Hashem. This is not ideal. This is not what was made to be, okay? Yeah. So we're doing the best we can with the tools we have. We found laws to make it work in our B'diavad situation. Just like the Jew that grows up in America not knowing they're a Jew, we find leniencies to allow them to connect, right? Judaism is not meant to be impossible. It's meant to be doable, okay? So we have to find what we can work with. That's different than what will be, because what will be is the ideal situation. All the Jews will live in Israel. Everyone, the whole world will know that God is king, and everyone will serve God. Much different scenario, right? We're trying to go back to this concept of Garden of Eden in some ways too. We want simpler ways. We want to restore relationship and not be separated. So things are going to be quite different, okay? Some things will still apply, of course. We'll still have laws on how businesses work, but the businesses that are supposed to work at the end is different than now. And there's this weird funky period because we have this concept that we never fully die. Like our bodies, though those may return to dust, but our neshama, our soul, that's part of God. And so that can't expire. It can't come to an end of existence. And it has to be returned to that holiness. And so what does that look like? And that's where we come up with the discussions that we say within Torah about the resurrection of the dead. But the economy then is going to be different, very different than the economy now. So the economy now is we have these laws that we follow. For example, I can't charge a Jew interest. If I loan Levy down the street $25 and he comes back and says, thank you for loaning $25, here's $30, I have to say no. The loan was $25. If it was $24.99 and he offers me $25, I say no, the loan was $24.99. Oh, well, you know, I only pay in whole numbers. This happened to me, right? Somebody overpaid me for a product that I had listed at a set price. I say, you overpaid me by 12 cents. I said, oh, well, I only pay in full numbers. I don't do cents. I was like, well, I can't accept 12 cents. I can either A, return it to you, or B, you tell me that you wanted me to donate that 12 cents to the Zaka. It's a Zaka charity, and I'll go give it to somebody. And so he's like, okay, go do the charity for 12 cents. Right? I can't charge you interest. It's just how it is. Right? It's a law. There's no way around it. Now, we have similar concepts. Right now, we're in a year called Shemitah year, right? Every 7 years, we have to give the land, or there's 6 years of labor and 1 year of rest for the land. We entered Shemitah year with this Rosh Hashanah. The land in Eretz Yisrael is Shemitah produce right now. We cannot do regular agricultural business with it. There are workarounds in which we can still survive, but it's not a regular business year. And so we follow those laws.
That was his intervention, Kat, so you can continue.
That's great. I enjoyed that very much. I'm really glad that Terry managed to interview you, Yoni. Now we have next Ibrahim Khan. And I know, Ibrahim, you're on a little bit of a deadline, so we'll start you with as little ado as possible. Ibrahim holds a BA in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from the University of Oxford, and an MA in Islamic Banking and Finance from Markfield Institute. He's a graduate of the Alamaya program, a traditional Islamic scholar, under the tutelage of Sheikh Akram Nadwi. Previously worked as a funds lawyer in London at Beauvois and Plimpton. I hope I said that right, Ibrahim. LLP, and before that, Ashurst LLP. He also studied at the Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments and holds a diploma in investment advice and financial planning, as well as a certificate in investment management. He's lectured extensively on Islamic finance, investment and zakat in mosques, universities and schools around the UK. Ibrahim, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Many thanks, Kat. It's a pleasure to be here, guys, and really enjoyed all of the presentations that have preceded. It's fascinating to see, the different perspectives to the same, kind of questions, same kind of problem sets that we're all puzzling over. I've not really, given this presentation any specific structure on purpose, and I thought I'd just jot down a few high-level, kind of insights, attitudes as they came to me, and share that with you all. So I obviously come from an Islamic tradition, and I think the first and key thing to say with the Islamic tradition is that, like the Abrahamic faith and probably a number of other faiths, there's the concept of the afterlife, and so this continuum that we are on is an infinite continuum, and so we are dealing with time that is no longer the physical finite time that we are dealing with. It's more of an infinite kind of spectrum, because the afterlife goes on forever, and therefore this idea of a disruption, some kind of chaos or a change, or in the Islamic tradition, what is known as the akhirah, or the end of times. That kind of narrative is simply a stepping stone as part of that wider journey. And ultimately, the thing that unites the entire process is, how do you actually approach it? What are you actually supposed to be thinking about as an individual throughout that process? And the key thing that Muslims look to is doing what God wants, doing what He wants, as opposed to what we want. And I think there's a deeper purpose here, or there's a deeper meaning here, and that is that it's almost Greek-like in the teaching, where you look at the individual, and what is good for the individual is to look at the manufacturer's manual, and to understand that even though sometimes things might seem counterintuitive, it makes sense to follow that manufacturer's manual. And we believe the Almighty has created us in a certain form. We believe that society and culture has been crafted around us with a deep purpose to it and a deep balance to it. And therefore, in order for us to achieve that self-actualization, in order for us to reach the purpose of our creation, we should do what He wants, because that is actually the thing that really makes sense. And tied within that is this idea of delayed gratification. And I think we can see that really, really obviously and intuitively, where you see, particularly in athletics, any outstanding success is always preceded by a long process of hard graft, as they say in the UK, and that delayed gratification is, you only see the end of it. You only see the point when Usain Bolt runs the fastest 100 meters, but you don't see all of the hard graft before it. And I think there's a link between that core intuition of seeing success as delayed gratification, and doing what He, the Almighty, wants, as opposed to what we want, which is often very short-term in nature. And then I think, so that's I guess one kind of bundle of thoughts. The other thought I had was around a tradition in Islam. So in Islam, you have two sources of scripture, or two sources of truth. One is the Quran, which is seen as the word of God, and the other one are the sayings or the teachings or stories about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so one of these, very famous one, is that he said that even if resurrection were established, i.e. the Day of Judgment was about to come, and there's a vivid description of that in the Quran where the skies are rolled up, the mountains are cast asunder. And I think that kind of imagery is reflected in the Bible and the Torah as well. Even if resurrection were established upon one of you, while he has in his hand the sapling, let him plant it. That's the teaching. And we can all, lots of scholars have puzzled over this, but the idea there is, it's a bit of a strange thing. Why would one want to plant a sapling when it doesn't actually have any real purpose at that point? You're literally seeing, the earth boiling up, and that this is the end. But even at that point, you should plant the sapling. And I think, when we're discussing this kind of disaster context, I think that this teaching of, wanting to do good, even in the face of, impending doom, I think is quite a powerful teaching. And it's something that I think is tied up with, our humanity. And it's something that, shows the high level that we should put to really trying to always do the right thing, even in the face of insurmountable odds. And then the other teaching that I thought would be interesting as a reflection was, this concept of concentric circles of mercy within the religion. So you've got another saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where he said, the merciful will be shown mercy by the most merciful. Be merciful to those who are those on earth, and the one in the heavens will have mercy upon you. Let me say that again, because there's a lot of mercies going on. The merciful will be shown, so if I am merciful, will be shown mercy by the most merciful, i.e. God. Be merciful to those on earth, and the one in the heavens will have mercy upon you. And the Arabic is Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, irhamu man fil ardi yarhamukum man fis sama. There's that word Rahma, which weaves through it. So for those who are interested in Hebrew and Arabic and those kind of languages, I'm sure you'll be interested in the etymology there. And actually, interestingly, the word Rahma, the word mercy, comes from the word womb, Rahim, where the fetus is housed. And even in the word Rahim, there are these circles of protection around the womb. And when we think about mercy in Islam, we think about how you have the individual. The first act of mercy that you do is you protect yourself. But then the second act of mercy that you do, let's say there's a car coming towards you, the second act of mercy that you would do if you're crossing it with your family is to make sure that your kids are safe and you push them out of the way. And then after that, the third act and the fourth act of mercy are that you continue looking wider and wider in society to see who else you can protect, because obviously, you have really important obligations to yourself and to your family, but then you have important obligations, but probably weaker, to your neighbors and to wider society. And the Prophet, he was seen as the Rahmatul lil Alameen, the mercy to all of mankind. So I guess it was a manifest, it was being a pinnacle of that manifestation of mercy, which is I'm being merciful, why I care for all of mankind, and we should obviously aspire to be like that. The other thoughts I had were around Islamic finance, because I know that this discussion is partly about economic justice and thinking about how Islamic traditions or faith traditions can inform the economics of these kind of disaster scenarios. And I think one of the key aspects, and I won't go through Islamic finance in all of its wonderful minutiae and intricacies, but I think one important principle is that it is equity-based as opposed to debt-based primarily. And the wonderful thing that comes with being equity-based is that you do proper due diligence. And what I mean by that is in the global financial crisis, what the key cause of that were the mis-selling of mortgages to people who shouldn't really have had those mortgages in large parts of America. And the reason that drove the selling of those mortgages was because the banks who were doing the selling, or the people who were doing the selling, knew that they wouldn't have to hold on to those pieces of paper. They could then sell those pieces of paper on. And so in other words, they were seen as currency for these people. And so the incentives were completely misaligned. And it didn't really matter, frankly, if you could afford a house or not. As long as you could take out the mortgage and they could sell that piece of paper quite quickly, so it was off their balance sheet, brilliant, that's money. And the problem when you have the lowering of the due diligence levels through the ecosystem is what we saw in the global financial crisis. You have massive amounts of contagion and all sorts of things break down really badly. With the equity-based model, with the Islamic finance model, the emphasis is very much on two things. The first is we really don't like derivatives. We really don't like moving around pieces of paper, and we really like actual, taking a stake in the underlying asset. So if you are going to be giving a mortgage to someone, an Islamic mortgage, you actually take a share, you actually buy a stake in the property. So you really care about what the property is, does it exist? And is the person that you are going into a partnership with, who is going to buy it with you and pay a rent on their portion, are they good for their money? So the standard of the economic activity goes up. And I think that's hopefully something that can inform a lot of the way that our modern economy is structured. And interestingly enough, the Islamic banks were not badly hit at all by the global financial crisis for this very reason. They were interestingly annoyed before the global financial crisis because they never really got to play with the derivatives. So they felt like they didn't get access to the fun stuff, but actually ultimately it turned out that that was a good thing. The fifth observation that I wanted to share was around blockchain technologies and decentralized systems. I think Islam obviously hasn't spoken directly on blockchain technology, but the sentiment is very positive around it. And I think the reason why is because of the nature of money. Islam has always been quite questioning of the nature of the modern fiat currency that we have, where the value of it really often just derives from the promise that someone is going to get paid. And that doesn't mean Islam is there's obviously multiple schools of thought in Islamic economics, and there's multiple views on this, but the idea of a blockchain-based currency where you take away the power to issue currency from the hands of a state to a decentralized group of ordinary folk that is actually programmed by a smart contract that we have all a group of people have agreed to and have signed up to, and people can then vote with their feet and say, yeah, we like that structure. That's quite promising. It's quite interesting, and the reason why Islam likes that is because normally with the issuing of currency, you are essentially issuing debt. So the way that the money supply works, and the way that money enters into the economy these days, it is by issuing debt. And obviously that debt is interest-based, and Islam doesn't like the interest aspect to it. And you need to necessarily create more and more debt in order to actually pay off the entire amount. So there's an interesting, I think, potential marriage there, and also I think something that is useful for the entire world, frankly, as we move from a very centralized system to a very decentralized digital space, which I think is a positive thing. And then really the final thing, and one of my favorite teachings about business and Islam is again a saying of the Prophet, where he says that may the mercy of Rahimallahu abdan samhan idha ba'a samhan idha qara samhan idha ishtara. So the mercy of God is upon the on the servant, on the person, when he is lenient when he is buying, he is lenient when he is selling, and he is lenient when he is calling in a loan. And I think that's a really, really profound and powerful teaching that we should take to hand. And I also think, actually, funnily enough, there's a deep economic benefit to that as well. Because if you are lenient, if you are a good counterparty, to use the technical term, if you are a person that people like to do trade with, then that means that you attract lots more interconnection. And that actually makes you, economically and very, pragmatically a better off person. But of course, there's a spiritual element to this as well, which is that, you shouldn't approach economic transactions and financial matters by, the simple principle of I'm going to maximize my own self-interest. There needs to be, that give and take where, you try and make the ships of everyone rise alongside your own. So those were some, general, slightly scattergun thoughts, and I hope you'll find some of them at least interesting.
Ibrahim, thank you so much. I'm really amazed at the breadth of different perspectives that we've heard on how faith and the way we do business with one another, the business of doing business, and the awareness of potential or probable collapse integrate, and how those different perspectives, well, it feels to me, others may disagree, as though there are some common threads in there, common threads that come from our interconnectedness and our humanity. But people haven't come to listen to me, come to listen to all of you. And so what we'll do next, if we may, is move on to some questions. I think Viviana and Jim are possibly combing through the questions that are in the chat at the moment. In the meantime, what I'd like to do, if I may, is ask each of our panelists a couple of questions, starting with, I'd like to ask each of you, what did you think we were going to be talking about when we first invited you to come here? When we put this melange of business and faith and potential collapse, what did you think we were all about? I have to say, we were really excited at de-siloing different trains of thoughts that happen within DAF, because so often the interfaith group does what it does and the business group do what they do. Of course, just like everything else, it's all connected. So I'm going to put that first, if I may, to actually, Ibrahim, may I put it to you, because I think you're under a time deadline. Is that right, or has that pressure gone away? Are you still there, Ibrahim?
Not here.
I've lost you.
Yeah, I think he left.
Oh, he left. Okay. That being the case, that's a shame. That being the case, I'll pass on to Pat, if I may, please.
I'm really sad that Ibrahim left. I was there's so many similarities in thinking that goes on that I wanted to express to him. What did I think was going to happen? Well, I was kind of hoping what we're doing was going to happen, so I'm pretty easy that way. So I'm good. Thank you.
Richard, was this transpire to be the event you expected it to be?
Yeah, it has been to a very large degree, partly because in about 2000, I seem to be quite good at creating groups. I'm sort of a serial social entrepreneur in that sense. And one of the many things I created was something called the Quakers and Business Group, which I don't have much actual interaction with these days, if I'm honest. But, that's the way things happen. But that was created in about 2000 to actually explore how we translated those Quaker testimonies into a way of working. And we actually produced a Quaker Business Testimonies at the time. There must be a copy behind me somewhere. And I think it's been updated at least once since, which is a standard Quaker procedure because our insights develop and grow over time. But we spent a lot of time having this sort of discussion and discovering that actually what each person brought to the group was quite different in many ways, and what they expected or wanted reassurance about. Frequently we do want reassurance. I mean, why shouldn't we when we are uncertain about our own position? Differed as well, and yet we could draw from each other, and we are doing that tonight. We're drawing from different traditions and finding, actually, I think as some people have noted in the comments, quite a lot of similarities, which is really quite encouraging, really. So no, this is pretty much what I hoped and expected would happen.
Great stuff. Viv, I think you have a question up your sleeve.
I'll ask the question that Malika was asking. I think she just left. But the question is, what is the role of convictions versus embodying the interbeing to look and change our harmful financial agreements? And I'll put that one to Pat first.
Can you repeat that one more time? I read it a couple of times and I'm still having trouble holding on to all of it. So read it one more time and I'll give it a shot.
Okay, I did ask for more clarification around embodying the interbeing. So I will also read what she sent me. The question is, what is the role of convictions versus embodying the interbeing to look and change our harmful financial agreements? And so I asked, do you need
Okay, I'm going to go from there before we add any more to that. If you don't mind. So that hit me in the way that I can respond to. Well, you know what excuse me, what I've been saying is that I've really had it with brilliance and genius at this point. I really have. And so to me, that's convictions. I'm gonna lump that in with convictions. And you know, I come from a tradition of that has Vision Quest. So what is Vision Quest? Vision Quest is when you humble yourself as a human being and you submit yourself to a greater intelligence than your own. That's one way to describe it. And it's kind of geared to our context here. So we intentionally bring ourselves to the end of our own resource and submit. And we do that through fasting with no food and no water. And sometimes in the sun for 4 days. And so we, in one circumstance, it's not humanly possible to complete our most sacred vow that we will complete it. It's not humanly possible to do it unless we are met by the great mystery, unless we are met by that spiritual power. And so when we enter into that state, into that communion, that relationship, insight comes. Insight comes that is relevant and appropriate, I'll say, for a human being to be able to enact. And so for me, that's a big part of the process. And so I was curious, as you were speaking, Richard, about this move to the Quaker tradition, because that's my understanding is it's opening up, you know, it's a process for opening up to that mystery, to the spirit that moves. And I was just thinking about, you know, I was making these links for you, and I don't know if they're real or true at all, but that's also sort of what leads you to this place of hearing the need for the work and your calling with tax justice. And I'll just take a quick moment here to also say that I feel like when you talked about re-examining taxes as an opportunity for us to understand what our obligation is to each other. That was very powerful. And so I feel like in the coursework that we're doing around reimagining money, I think we need to now add a section that can be expanded on in so many ways around tax. And I'm going to hop in and answer one little question here what is this person's name? They're quite adamant over here. Is it Jaya? Yeah. Jay is like, what the heck? What are you guys talking about? What do you mean? So, I mean, I know you know what we're talking about, but I mean, one of the things that I saw early on was why money? Why even keep money? And I don't think that was the whole question. I've been listening, so I haven't been able to study everything that you're writing there. You're writing a lot. But I do want to answer that question about why money. And I said it earlier before we started. And so, because for me, as a Native person, I would just as soon have us get rid of money entirely. Like if we got rid of money entirely, wouldn't that solve so many things? Because to me, it would have to point us back to the earth. And I do think we're coming upon the time when we won't have money. Money is going to lose its meaning, possibly within 5 years, I'm going to say. So that's why wealth holders at this moment are asking, what should I be doing with this wealth while it still has meaning? While we can still translate it into meaning that moves in the physical world. And so an elder has me thinking about this in a new way, in that he's saying to me, but if money is already in everything, if we change what it means, if we change the consciousness that we have, I mean, we made the whole thing up, right? So we can change what it means. It can mean whatever we want it to mean. It can have whatever consciousness we apply to it. So if it's already in everything, what happens when you change its meaning and its consciousness? Can it become a vehicle for transcendence, or whatever we want to call that? I'll stop there. Thanks.
Richard.
I would like to have that elaboration on what embodying the into being means in Malika's question, if you don't mind.
No, I don't. And I think Pat was spot on. So it means feeling the earth, feeling abundance, feeling generosity, for example, rather than persuading others on one's convictions.
It's a really difficult question to answer, because I spend most of my life creating ideas, writing ideas, promoting ideas. Am I right to do that? My answer to that is that seems to be my purpose. And in the organizations I've created, I'm very much normally cast as the thinker. I'm not the person who does the networking and the outreach, but rather more the creator of the ideas. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the creating the ideas. I'm not actually also sure I'm worried about expertise. I actually think expertise, even genius, if I come across it, and I think I have met some people who are geniuses in my life, is not something I worry about so long as it is rooted. The problem is that so little is rooted. And if that's what the understanding of the interbeing is, then yes, I get that feeling, because what we need to do is have the understanding that none of this is for our own sense of purpose. It is one of the problems I often have. I have a problem with some organizations at the moment where it does appear that they were created for a purpose and they now appear to be pursued for personal gain. I'm not good at that. And I'm a person who's created real businesses, I mean, and owned businesses, and frequently. And again, actually, I note the questions. I don't know, is it Gia, Jay? Your questions about these things, I might link it in a sense to these other questions about, purpose. I feel that we do need to think and use conviction about how we change that understanding of purpose. I don't believe that we are going to persuade the whole world that they will be spiritual, for example. They will understand this. There's a curious thing about the Quakers in England. I talk particularly about England because that's the yearly meeting, or England and Wales. There were about 17,000 of them 200 years ago, and there's still about 17,000 now. I don't know what the magic of 17,000 is, but it appears that there are a certain number of people who can carry this message at a point of time in membership. Now, what I think we therefore have to do is, I mean, I'm not an evangelizer. I don't try to persuade somebody that they should share my faith, but I do undoubtedly ask them to sometimes share my conviction, not because I tell them they should, but because I'm trying to argue the merit of it. And if I root that at something at the moment, which is actually an answer to that question, what can we do? I was giving a seminar yesterday at the Institute of Chartered Accountants in the UK, which is an opportunity I'll never turn down, because in this sense, it's a seat of power. And speaking truth to power is one of the things that Quakers most certainly thought it was their job to do. And I will. And I argue that we need to change what is called the capital maintenance concept within accounting. Now, the capital maintenance concept in accounting is literally what we value. It is what we measure as the difference between last year's worth as indicated by our balance sheet and this year's worth as indicated by a balance sheet, both denominated in money. But I make it very clear, not necessarily indicative of what we're trying to maximize. It is a very, very modern and very, very narrow understanding of business that it is there to maximize profit. It is really one that has only existed for a very limited period of time. 40, 50 years. Before that, it simply did not. And I've read a lot of history of business. And I say I've run businesses where I frankly don't think I ever profit maximized. I don't even know how to profit maximize. I'll be completely honest with you. I've been a chartered accountant for 40 years. I'm not entirely sure I know what profit is. That's a pretty big admission, although I can add up some numbers and call it that. And I certainly don't know how to maximize it because I don't know what I'm comparing to. But what I do know is that we now can't do that. But we have, and it's absolutely true, and the concern expressed in the questions about the fact we have a financial system that is set up to maximize financial worth is true. And I'm arguing for a new system of accounting, sustainable cost accounting, where I'm arguing, but actually, that cannot be the case anymore. Because business cannot, should not, will not, if we are to survive, maximize profit unless it actually literally manages the resources of the planet so that we can survive. In other words, the capital maintenance concept we have to have now is the maintenance of our planet. And within that, we have to manage our cash flows, and that is how a business will survive. Businesses have to have a positive cash flow eventually to survive. We have to manage our cash flows within that constraint. You will manage the planet as your priority. Now, I'm putting forward an idea there, which appears to be a minor change to accounting rules, and which is actually pretty fundamentally flipping radical. To be blunt about it, I'm saying all that you think your business is about is not what your business should be about. Your business has to actually deliver income within the constraint of our planet. It's no longer your job to accumulate cash for cash's sake. And unsurprisingly, that is not going down well with everyone, not least because they simply don't understand what I'm even saying. So I have to have that conviction to carry on with an argument which is at the moment incomprehensible to many people, to root what I hope is economic activity within the constraints of this planet, this wider living organism in which we live. And so I don't see that there's a conflict. In a sense, I feel that there is a reconciliation to be found, and the job of the conviction is to try to use whatever skills we have to secure that process of relating one to the other. Sorry, that was a rather long answer.
That was a really helpful answer. I think I have a question to go with it, and it ties in with what both Pat and Richard have been saying. Richard, you talked about the concept of needing to maximize profits, a company needing to maximize profits, having been around for a relatively short period. And indeed, the idea of a company has been around only for quite a short period. And I think its time is getting gone, really. There are other structures that are better. That happened around the same time that the advertising industry was invented. Stop us just buying what we needed, because that wasn't making enough money for the owners of companies, and to start us buying things that we wanted. It was the manufacturing of desire and the dopamine hit that comes from that. And that's predicated really on fear, loss of status, separation, needing to be better than others, and individualism. And so that whole capitalist machine seems to be so integrated with what we've lost in terms of our spiritual connection to one another and to the resources we use. It's the job of re-engineering our economic system, which feels as though it's creating a new form of colonialism, but now elites are not geographically separated, they're just those who are rich and powerful. It's the job of fixing that system. Is that an inside job before it's an outside job? And I'm going to throw that at first, if I may.
Sorry, I didn't hear who you were throwing it at first.
I think I was throwing it at Pat, I think. And by an inside job, I mean it's a job of the heart as opposed to purely of lobbying politicians.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you cut out right when you said who you were calling on first, so we were both looking at each other. Yes. Well, one, so this is what I'm talking, and this is where I'm stepping into that place that my elder was talking about so money can be whatever we want it to be, since we're the ones who made it up. And so I'm going to challenge that structure of even personal income a little bit here. Why? Why personal income? What is the need for that? And it just occurs to me, you know, I'm living at my mom's house here, and I'm in suburbia here, which is not usual for me. It's not my normal place to be. So I just watch how life goes here, and everybody's in their own house with their own vehicle, sweating out their mortgage. I love you telling me the actual meaning of that word. Right? So everybody's in their own house sweating out their own mortgage by themselves. They come out and wave. How's it going? Going fine. Thank you very much. Meanwhile, you know, all hell's breaking loose in the world economy and personal economy. And, you know, yeah, so what I realized here is that every household requires its own ecosystem. To live as a fierce individual in that way, every single individual house requires its own ecosystem. And the earth just can't afford for every human being to create its own ecosystem. It doesn't add up. And so I'm now making the leap to say that perhaps even the construct of personal income is similar. It also requires the individual to create its own ecosystem. Versus communal sharing of ecosystems. So we're seeing, you know, one response to the situation right now is we're seeing many different communities arriving on the land all over the place, all different kinds, intentional communities, we call them, huh? And so there is this movement around, and part of that is being driven, you know, sort of happily, I'll say for me, by the fact that you can't make a living the way that you used to be able to because of what you're just describing here about maximum profit. But I also well, let me finish that thought and then I'll come back to profit. And so I'm being brought to something that I read from Joseph Chilton Pearce in his book The Biology of Transcendence, in which he's describing, I guess it was the fall of Poland during one of the wars, and how there was a network of farmers that had created a cooperative before the fall, and you know, they were in a state of cooperation and collaboration and community, and they were creating an ecosystem amongst themselves rather than having each farmer have their own ecosystem. And so then when the collapse came, when it came time to rebuild, it began to rebuild around this this farmers cooperative. And he said it was because they had coherence. So I think that is a word that I would want to flesh out and study with us if we had more time. What did he mean by they had coherence then? And so he proposes in this book, perhaps the goal is not to try to change things on a global scale, but instead to create lifeboats of coherence. So this is a very hopeful thing for me, to create lifeboats of coherence, which I'm going to say is community. And I've been called on to create one myself. So as a fierce hermit and recluse, that's kind of an uncomfortable proposition, but I'm down. As Ibrahim said, we got to do what Spirit is asking. So here I go. Just to go back briefly to profit, and then I'll stop. So this is the part of the reimagining money, and Jay, going back to what I was saying earlier. So again, the whole construct is whatever we want it to be. Right now, we're saying, I love this thing. It says, well, the holy people say to me, you can have it any way you want it. I mean, this is a free will construct. Do you know that? You guys can have it any way you want it. And right now, you're saying you want it like this. And so I love this meme. It says, we can have it any way we want it. And then the meme says, and we choose white supremacy and credit scores. Any way we want it. We choose white supremacy and credit scores. Wild, huh? So we can have so we can also, this is something that I've been working with in this study that I've been in, is we can make profit whatever we want it to be. And so really the money becomes a crutch, a mental construct crutch for us to begin to transition into whatever we want it to be. So we can keep using it as metaphor to change into different ideals and decide what else would we want it to be. I'll stop there.
Can I jump in with one thought? And it was from your comment about company, and that company is a new idea. I don't think it is actually, Kat. I'm going to have to disagree with you. The etymology of the word company is from two Latin words, com, together, and pani, bread. Literally, it is to break bread together. It is those with whom you share your sustenance. That is your company. There's something quite sacramental about that for some, perhaps, because there is, the breaking of the bread and wine is clearly of significance to Christians. But we recognize that idea as well in the word Pat's just used, community, there again. So this idea of what profit is, what profit maximization is, it is making sufficient bread to sustain. And I always thought that there was a sufficiency. When I get to a certain point in earning income, my amount of pro bono work goes up significantly because I can afford to now work pro bono. And I do work pro bono. Most of my accounting work is now pro bono. At a rate which other accountants would laugh about. I mean, I theoretically have to charge to actually, for all sorts of technical reasons, have to do so, but it's tiny. And that's deliberate because I can afford to do that. It's about the company that I want to keep. And I think that this idea of the inclusivity of the company sharing with is what we lost. Now, I'm not saying, of course, there was never exploitation. The 19th century was full of the most hideous exploitation of people. And we went through the whole history of slavery and utterly demeaning of people in an enormous way. But it is possible for company to have that meaning, I think, where we actually respect each other and the contribution we bring within that process of exchange, where we bring our individual skills. Again, Pat, I heard what you said. You come as this person who doesn't like leading a community, who's going to lead a community. But actually that's, we are sometimes demanded to bring different skills to the table. And I think that's what a company does. The difficulty is, and the thing that I so often wonder about, I have a hobby, which is actually making model railways. Look, it's so far away that I've actually got a truck right beside me next to my work computer right now. That is not a prop, that's just there, genuinely. And I design and make those things, and it's my way of unwinding. But I often look at the phenomenal skill that so many people who are working in jobs where they're undervalued, where they can't bring their skill to their company, do instead bring to their hobby, where they bring out the talent which is ignored elsewhere. And I always have this feeling, find what that talent is. When I was very young, in business terms, I mean, I was in my mid-20s. I set up my first companies when I was 26, two, but almost the same moment, which was completely crazy because they were also 700 miles apart, but that's history, and it worked. But I was told by somebody, if you see somebody who's really good, hire them. And I say, well, what for? Doesn't matter. They've got something to bring to the table, hire them. And I thought that was incredibly good advice, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find how we combine. Now, money can, in that sense, help us do that. That's why I do not condemn money. I don't share the view that money is all bad. If we can use money as a tool to help us realize that objective, then it fulfills a purpose in our lives. When it is used to oppress and deny us that opportunity, it does not. But that's the same as I think about paper. You know, this stuff can be really useful. It can also deliver evil messages and be used for the delivery of pornography and all sorts of things, which I find deeply oppressive and horribly uncomfortable. So I'm neutral about the morality of paper. I'm neutral in a sense about the morality of money. It's what we use it for and how we structure its management that matters. So I leave you with that idea, compani. We need to break bread with each other and our objective is to have sufficient bread that all may partake in that process.
Thanks, Richard. I can see we have several hands raised at the moment. Mary, I think you were first. Then I'm going to go to Viviana, Elizabeth, and Mark Anderson in that order. And I think that will likely be, let me just check whether we've got anyone else with a hand up.
I really need to leave at 7, I'm afraid.
Yes, yeah. Okay, Emma Mary, far away.
Thank you, Kat. Pat, my question is specifically for you. I did write it in the chat, but it wasn't noticed. Pat, your talk so resonated with me because you said things which I've always known to be true and never heard said. So my question is, when I know the Indigenous way makes so much sense and speaks so deeply to our souls, how can we incorporate these truths into how we live our lives? It's almost, for me, I know these truths. I don't know how I know them because I'm an English person and but I do know them and I've known them forever. And yet I live like everybody else lives. How can we bring these truths into the way we live if we feel like I do? They are so truthful and helpful and just how we need to be living. Thank you.
Thank you. Ask the earth. We got to ask the earth. We have to inquire from the earth. She's the boss. She's the authority. All other false authorities will bow to her. Eventually, it can be no other way. I also have a vision of. I want to back up and say something that Ibrahim brought up, where he's talking about this idea that when your cosmology holds that this is that in a way reality can never be destroyed, there can never be that final death, as mine does. And so from our perspective, many different indigenous peoples' perspectives, we say that we've already passed through many worlds. So our story of Earth and humanity is much expanded beyond Western sciences, hundreds of thousands of years. And so we actually have teachings from some of these worlds that we've managed to keep together. So, in the event of the loss of the world with the flood, there were reasons why that happened. And my elders tell me that it was because men and women believed they could live without each other. That's how we lost the world to the flood, for instance. So, so we have a cosmology that sort of allows for this time in a different way than those. Modern world really focuses on a single lifetime and a single lifespan. And perhaps you hear about indigenous cultures talking about 7 generations. So I'm always traveling within a group of 7 generations. Some people say we're looking forward to 7 generations, which of course is never a bad idea. And some people hold that as though we are riding in that center generation with 3 behind us and 3 ahead of us. So lately I've been kind of trying to inhabit that place. What's it like to travel within those 7 generations? So I want to say that it could be that we are coming to end a world here. I think all possibilities are still humming in the air, personally. But that's possible. It all depends on what we choose to do with our free will and also what we do with our consent. So one thing that I think that anybody can do at this point is really understand the power, the spiritual power that has been given to us with our consent, because as this is a free will construct, our consent is everything. Because one will is not to overcome another will. It goes back to this construct that I was talking about, right? That will have to be made up. So we never gain anything by force, which is a crazy thing to say in a power over paradigm. This power over paradigm is telling us everything can be gained by force, when the fact is nothing can be gained by force. It will all have to be redone. So this cooperation and collaboration piece is huge. So to declare what we give our consent to. So if you have that sense of what I'm saying is true for you about this Mother Earth, and we do not give our consent to the destruction of Mother Earth, we do not give our consent to the destruction of our relatives or the water. We tend to say, well, it doesn't matter whether I like it or not or give my consent or not, they're just going to do it anyway. Well, it does matter, because if we declare our consent and that boundary is crossed, from my perspective, a spiritual accounting becomes due. So I say, let us not give away this whole life of our own free will. Let us declare clearly. And so at the beginning of every one of our ceremonies, now I understand the wisdom of it, we say we do this so the people can live. Just the human people? No. The platypus people, the algae people, the stone people, everybody. We do this so the people can live. We are declaring what we give consent to, and that's something that we need to do. I have a lot of YouTubes out there, either under Pat McCabe or Women Stand Shining, but there's one in particular that's called First Ceremony, I believe. And it's how I approach the earth to ask for her input. And I do think that if we're wise, we're going to reach out for that guidance. Wherever we are, how can earth instruct? Because earth only instructs about how to live. And sometimes destruction is necessary for us to live. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Richard, I'm conscious you need to go in a moment. We have Viviana, Elizabeth, and Mark. I'm just wondering if either of you 3 have a question that's specifically for Richard. Wave your hand at me if you do, or is it equally for you do, Elizabeth?
It's not specific, but I would value Richard's perspective. In part because I'm the chief officer of the Unitarians, we have lots in common with the Quakers. But something that a question that I feel like I'm holding a lot is, I can really see the vision of how money, commerce, all of these things could work differently. As Richard has explained, that sort of really positive vision of the future, I can see it, I can feel it. And what I can't see is sort of how we get there, and particularly with this sense of collapse of what new challenges are we going to experience in the coming years, what difficulties, what things are going to come up as existing socioeconomic systems fall apart in different ways. And I'm just really interested in what other people can see of how the change might happen.
Okay, if I might, because I have just simply promised that actually I will be doing compani. I'll be sharing bread with my family, and I know it's getting ready. It's smelling really good. I don't know what it is, but it's smelling really good. There is an accounting concept which I think is worth mentioning in this context. It's called going concern. The assumption is that your enterprise is going to carry on into the future. Now, that's remarkably similar to some of the debates we've been having here. Is your company going to last? Is it going to outlast you? Or is it actually heading for extinction? And right now, what really encourages me is that I am meeting with people who are responsible for the management of hundreds of billions of pounds worth of investments, who are actually asking the question, are we responsible for investing in companies that aren't going concerns, that are literally heading for extinction because the way they are working is unsustainable? And a relatively small group of those, but a pretty noisy group who have a lot of influence, because actually small groups of noisy people seem to actually be capable of generating a lot of influence if I think they are conviction-based, are asking of businesses, tell us how you actually are a going concern. What is it that is going to make you survive? And only yesterday in the UK, and I guess you're here in the UK, Elizabeth, from your accent, if nothing else, but it sounds very English, as does mine, although I am actually Irish. But here, yesterday, we had the government saying they're going to make financial services companies responsible for asking the question of businesses, what is your carbon footprint? Now, I've already said I don't want to know that. I want to know how you're going to get rid of your carbon footprint. But the point is that there are plenty of people out there who actually really are very stressed about this. And I mean, because of the work I'm doing around sustainable cost accounting, I am getting access to some very large investors who are saying, we like your question. We don't think that the companies we're engaging with are necessarily capable of answering it. And so we're going to put it to them. And my belief is that that is the process of change. Very often it's a very simple question that actually has a very powerful impact upon someone's life. Yeah. Ask a person, why are you here? And you can start a lifelong journey to try to provide that answer after all. Is your company going to survive has the same potential consequence. I don't know. How do I know? What have I got to do to find out? And I think that is why I believe it is possible that although we clearly face potential chaos, and I've known this for a long time, we might survive. That's my best hope. And I'm afraid I'm going to say a bid you all farewell. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. I really appreciated being here with you today. Thank you.
And you, Pat. Thank you. Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Jam. Thank you, Viviane.
Thanks for being with us, Richard. Okay, so we have Viviana, I see your hand has gone down.
Yes, I'll give my time to Mark.
Thank you.
I'm good for probably another 10 to 15 minutes if you guys want to go that far. You are hitting on my obsession, so there you go.
I think if we're happy to go on for a moment or so, that would be good. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a very interesting set of talks. Really interesting. I'm particularly interested in some things Pat said when she quoted Martin Prechtel about replacing everything, and I was thinking about it in a couple of ways. One, I mean, at least, I mean, in Western world now it's globalized with medicine and the way it is. We have this urge, this struggle of longevity, and we push we try to you know, with medicines and pills and everything. We try to keep going and keep going and keep going. And I contrast this to, I guess, the animal world, where you have blooms of creatures. You imagine small creatures, mice and things like this, and, you know, small mammals, and then they get too large a population, and then something else comes along and eats them, reduces them. So what I wanted to ask Pat was, is there a sense in Dene culture that an acceptance of death for humans is a way of giving back? And so in this sense of what we're talking about, there might be some way that we give back in a big way when we accept that many of us must die in a way to right what we've done and what we're doing.
That's a great question. I can't really speak to that from Dene culture. You know, my grandparents and parents were taken to Dutch Christian Reform missionary boarding schools, and so my knowledge of traditional culture is a little limited. It's coming back around to me, but it's a slow process. And elders are leaving us, and many have left us because of the COVID virus, which is very tragic for many indigenous cultures around the world, and I'm going to say for humanity at large, because I say, if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness. So when we lose those elders that still carry that knowledge, when we lose the languages, when we wipe out the peoples, we're actually destroying the human library of understanding, some of our best understanding of how to be here. But what I will say is kind of bringing us back to that scenario of, are we going to go off the cliff or aren't we going to go off the cliff, and what is right action in that moment? I guess I'm bringing your question to our current moment here. It's a slightly different question, but my sense is that if indeed we do get to bring ourselves to a next world, in the event we go off the cliff, and we get to bring ourselves to a next world, what really counts for our actions right now? So I love that idea of the planting of the sapling, even at the very end here. And what I see for that is, I believe that if in the event that we were to have to begin again, like really reinventing the wheel, sort of literally, right? But consciousness can remain with us. And so the name of the game for me right now is, how do we change consciousness? So that's why I'm always trying to speak to this expansion of our possibilities, and not only from within these imprisoning constructs that have been running for 5,000 years or more, that those have to be expanded, and we can expand them. I want us to really, I really want to open our consciousness. So as far as the death goes, then yes, our current consciousness says, live, 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 live. Although there are many elders that, you know, I'm living with a 97-year-old, and sometimes I'll say she even feels this way, that there are many elders who really wish they could die because they can't afford to live. They don't have any resources, and they're burning up all the resources of the next generation, and it's terrifying and terrible for them. I mean, of all, if we can have it any way we want it, why in the world that way, right? That our elders would be grieving the ones who get to live because they can't afford it. Madness, right? But I feel like for myself, I can say I'm content to live as long as I can be of service. And I would say that I would have been dead a long time ago because of my speaking truth to power, all different powers and all different dimensions, I would say, unless Spirit had a use for me. And so I claim my life to that extent, and not much further. I'm not a huge fan of Western medicines. I don't engage much that way, for some of the philosophical reasons that you're sort of bringing here. So thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's just about time for us to wrap up. I see, Jay, that you've got your hand raised. If we can take one short question from you, would be good. And then we'll move to closing remarks if we could.
Yeah, I wanted to remind we have we are internationally and supra regional aligned. Everything what supplies us, even food, and for the, let's say, 1 billion people live in big cities, and they need food from trucks driving in, and everything works. And now if you want to buy a bicycle, it doesn't work because of the pandemic. So, and there will be much deeper collapses of all this internationally aligned production and supply chain. And this could create such a chaos that we end up in a dystopian end-time chaos, because also it can come to a standstill of industries and an unmasking of the global dimming effect with this. And this would drive the turbo effects in such a way that it goes so fast, the sinking of the Titanic. So we need now very concrete acts. But as I said, the problem constellation of that we are forced to be against each other as long as we use monetary means, any kinds of, including the military apparatuses. This must be resolved in a very short time. Otherwise, it comes to a collapse, and it comes probably to an end of humanity and all life on Earth. Mm-hmm. So what can, and then we have another, by a chance, historically, we have another organization instrument, the internet. It has not a very good reputation because it's used in the sense of monetary means, but this, a hammer can be in order to destroy a house or to build a new house. And I think it's our last lifeline to save us as a world. And why don't we create a consciousness on this human act to shift globally simultaneously and come together with this act as one world, and then to fight against the climate catastrophe, what we can't do now because we use monetary means. And so why not to create this consciousness in this human concrete act, and instead of many other things like it's neoliberalism, it's, let's say, reform money, let's say people should die and we do have to reduce world population, but not to mention this concrete act. Why? And how do you see this?
So I'm not proposing that we, what did you say, reform money. To me, that sounds as though we're keeping the same structure. We're still keeping the power over paradigm, but we're going to change seats on the Titanic, as you're pointing out, in the way that we're going to reform money. So, you know, again, what I'm talking about with money is not, and again, I'd just as soon have it. I'm sort of, so you got to understand, I'm an indigenous person who has survived attempted genocide from that economic system, primarily driven by that economic system and a few other factors, but that's going to be the primary one. So you got to understand, I've been rooting for collapse since I was born. Okay? So I got no investment, no attachment, no need for that system to prevail at all. At all. Mm-hmm. So and I'm deeply affected by it, and it would be unwise for me to ignore it entirely. So I would just as soon have it all. You know, I'm sort of looking forward to what happens when money disappears. Then what? Then who are we? Then what's going to happen? I mean, there's lots of collapse for sure as a possibility, as you're pointing out. So I just want to say that, and then I'm going to say that, you know, as I said earlier, reiterate, you know, to reimagine money isn't about reforming it. It's about a massive change in consciousness. So again, you know, this is where I feel like indigenous culture can help inform. It's helping to open up the imagination. And this goes back to your question, Emma Mary. It's opening up humanity's imagination, because I can point to a concrete example of where human beings have a different concept of what it means to be human on the planet. And this is what the consciousness that I feel like has to happen in modern world paradigm. If you have only been born into modern world paradigm and capitalism, or however you want to describe all of that, and that's the only thing that has been in consciousness, and the structure that you've been presented with for generations, how would you really know? How could you have deep conviction and faith that there is another way to be human here. So I'm like pointing here. Hello, yes, there are humans who do it and think about it in entirely different ways with the exact same circumstance, under the exact same sky, exact same water, exact same human impulses. And yet they're choosing to do it in another way. That's like, I feel like one of my main purposes for being on Earth right now is to keep proposing that. Look at over here, look at over here, look at over here. So there's that. And then I'm going to go on just a little bit further for those of you hanging in here for this. As I said, you've hit on my obsession. But I'm going to talk about the way you're describing sequence of events. So my spirit helpers, I'll say, in ceremony, have scolded me, and they said, your understanding of cause and effect is rudimentary. It's rudimentary, and they're scolding me. And so I say, I mean, what else can I say at that moment? But I say, I agree with you. So I open myself to you, again, approaching the mystery, vision questing. I submit myself to you. What other kinds of cause and effect can I participate in other than the ones that have been shown to me, that are around me, that have been taught to me, that I've been able to work out for myself? I'm open to learning. The first thing they said to me is, all right, smarty pants, then the first thing we'll say to you is if all times are happening at the same time, what is possible? So they've been letting me chew on that for a while. So I'm going to say, if all times are happening at the same time, gosh, it sounds like a lot is possible. They keep insisting to me. They keep reworking time. Time is not what you think it is. They tell me over and over again. So for instance, so that scenario that you're describing, you know, I say the intellect and modern world paradigm is almost exclusively run on intellect. But if we look at those cultures with that 5,000 year, 10,000 year, 20,000 year sustainability track record, intellect is the least reliable way of knowing. It's a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. Why are they all singing? Why are they all dancing? Because those are ways that a human being can know in conjunction with Earth and cosmos. It's a way of receiving information. It's a way of receiving another kind of cause and effect. And it works. They have sustainability. So you're describing a very linear intellectual sequence of events. I call it the logic train. If this, then that. If this, then that. And if that, then this. And if that, then this. So, but there are other kinds of logic, and there are other kinds of cause and effect. And so I say, you know, the intellect's best job is making the airtight case for anything. That's why they have debate teams. You take up this argument, you take up this argument, and then watch them go at it. Watch the intellect at work, generating. It didn't have any of that belief before they started, but boy, half an hour into it, they are in conviction. This is what the intellect is best at. I'm not saying we don't need intellect, but we got to recognize it for what it is. When all you have is an intellect, everything is this. But if you have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing, there are other possibilities. So the heart and the spirit and the body, we're talking about somatics a lot right now, contain other kinds of wisdom that can create other realities. So people might call it woo-woo magical thinking, but I'm going to stand by who has the sustainability and how have they been going about it? Proof's in the pudding. So we can look to this, and I'm going to say that indigenous cultures also have to make a leap right now. Well, one, we've been battered deeply, and we have so much healing to do. But we have possibilities for making a leap as well. I don't think anybody gets off the hook right now. Nobody has it all down. There is a future calling that human beings at this moment are struggling. Everyone, there's a few maybe who are starting to get the grammar of what this future is saying is possible. But we're learning a new language in order to be able to receive the next phase of life, what comes next.
Pat, thank you. Thank you so much. So we're coming to the end of our session now, and I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. The only remaining one, Pat, so you'll have to carry that for everyone. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to pass around for a couple of last words from each of our organisers, starting with Viviana. Then, if I may, I'm going to leave the very last word to you, Pat. So get your thinking cap on, if you're so kind. And last but absolutely not least, we need to thank all of you who came along to listen and take part and put in your questions and perspectives today. It's such a gift to have had you here. And I have to say, I had the biggest grin seeing how many old faces and new turned up today to take part in this maybe slightly arcane, but really wonderful discussion. So I'm going to pass across to Viviana.
Thank you. And I want to again thank Pat and everybody who came, but especially I want to recognize that Pat is the last woman standing of the panelists. And I think there's a very deep reason for that. I think your words were the ones we needed to hear last. So thank you. And I did want to say one thing which has stuck with me throughout, and that is, Pat said that we can choose anything, and we choose white supremacy and credit scores. And there is a reason for that, because it benefits certain people. And for those who are not the ones who don't benefit from that, like myself, either from not being white or for not having good credit scores, we were taught that that's what matters. And so I think that's when really it becomes really important, this idea of embodying the interbeing, which Pat has mentioned repeatedly. And yes, I think that's so critical for all of us right now. So thank you all for being here. And I'll pass it on to Jim.
Thanks, Viviana. And yeah, I join Kat and Viviana and Terry, if you were here, and thanking all of our speakers. It was a remarkable discussion. I'm glad we recorded it. I'm going to go and listen to it at least once, because there's a lot to reflect on. I was very taken by the fact that we have 4 very different faith sources that are leading to very similar results, very similar sets of advice, all of them recognizing that our current world isn't the world that we need to be living in, and changes need to be made. And so it was very, very interesting discussion. I do thank all of the speakers, but particularly Pat, you for your very thoughtful and engaging words and action. So thank you again. One thing, Pat, I know Jillian raised you're talking about your reimagining money. Is there going to be an output from that, or are some of the other resources going to flow from that or not?
For sure, and really, I meant to do it at the beginning of this conversation as soon as I had a chance to speak, which was pretty early on. I like to dedicate these discussions and bring them into ceremony and prayer, honestly, because I feel like just having this discussion is already reordering reality. And so all of that work that I'm doing in my little corner, it's already changing the nature of reality and changing the consciousness of money. And that prayer that I read and what's in that basket, I believe everything it touches, it's going to sort of bring into this different consciousness that's coming and open up those possibilities. So there's definitely that going to happen. What else that you can hold in your hand or read with your eyes is going to come out remains to be seen. It's kind of a laboratory at this point.
Okay. Jim, was that all you wanted to say? Okay, I'm going to grab the mic back very quickly and then pass it to Pat for the closing word. So, yeah, I heard what you heard, Jim, this common thread between people who have different faiths but believe in something. And I think even if that something isn't a deity, it's a universe, it's Mother Earth, it's land, what comes of, or our connection with one another. It's about believing in something, and it all goes wrong when we don't believe in anything, including ourselves. For me, I come from a Christian faith, and it feels as though we're saying we need to awaken from this dream of a world that we've constructed with this damaging economic system. And I'm reminded of what Paul said in his letter to the Romans: not conformed, don't let your mind be conformed any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can test and approve what God's will is, his good and pleasing and perfect will, hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And if that's the common good, then that makes sense to me to wake up from that dream. It's not comfortable, but it wants doing. So, Pat, if you'd be kind enough to close out for us, that would be really wonderful.
Thank you. I want to thank all the other speakers. I have copious notes going over here from all of them, and many questions that they raised and many new inquiries. So my obsession will continue. I really appreciated Ibrahim's question. What should we be thinking about during this process? He talked about, so if life goes on forever, this destruction that we see coming is a stepping stone. And many faiths hold some version of that. And so he asked that question. So what should we be thinking about during this process? And so for those of us of faith, that's where that inquiry comes in. I mean, that's my process, is asking, who do I need to be at this time? And that has involved personal healing work, personal untying of knots, along with going deeper into my faith. But I'm also going to say expanding my faith. This time is creating new cosmologies within the lineage of my faith for me. So I don't feel like it's changing the doctrine, so to speak. It's not changing the fundamentals, but how to view them. So I remain open. I remain open to different ways that some of those same principles are being expressed to me. Sometimes they look quite foreign, but if I stay with them long enough, if I don't reject them out of hand, then I can see why they have been around for thousands of years. They're holding. And I will say that, and this is very recent, I also opened the door for some of them to be remade entirely. And I trust that divine input. So I'll close by saying what my elder grandmother said. She said, "You were born into beauty, as beauty, for joyful life. That is the truth. You were born into beauty, as beauty, for joyful life. That's the truth." And so we come from, in my culture, we come from original beauty, not original conflict and sin and having to make up for things. We can be restored always. There's a pathway always to be restored to that original beauty. So thank you so much for this conversation and for having me.